I'm getting the thumbs up, so I'm going to get us started. All right, good evening and welcome. I am so glad that you could all join us. I'm Jess. I am the director of the Eleanor D. Wilson Museum here at Hollins University. And tonight I am delighted to introduce artist Leigh Ann Beavers, whose exhibition titled "We Had All This" is currently on view. That exhibition and its related programs are sponsored in part by the City of Roanoke through the Roanoke Arts Commission, for which we are very grateful. Leigh Ann Beavers is a visual artist whose work combines her background as a naturalist with multimedia installation. She holds a bachelor's degree in printmaking from Virginia Commonwealth University and a master's degree in graphics from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Beavers currently serves on the Studio Arts faculty of Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, teaching courses in drawing, printmaking, eco art, and comics. Her background as a naturalist informs her art practice, and her work has been exhibited throughout the United States, England, and Ireland. Her current exhibition builds upon her earlier Whitethorn project, developed over the course of many years on a small island in Ireland, bringing her focus and keen eye now closer to home. We Had All This is a creative expression of reconciliation ecology, a branch of conservation biology seeking to preserve biodiversity in the midst of human development. Comprised of drawings, prints, collages, and installations, the exhibition draws attention to the myriad forms of life on the edges of our backyards, fields, and roadsides, making the work what Beavers calls, quote, a quiet signal of distress, asking viewers to notice the other life around them. Welcome.
Thank you, Jess. Good evening. Thank you all for coming, some of you a long ways. This is really exciting to me to get to talk here at Hollins again. I'll start things off with a huge loving thank you to the team here at the Wilson Museum, Jess Ambler, Laura Carden, Laura Jane Ramsberg, and Janet Cardy. It was pure pleasure putting up the show and working with them and still working with them. We still have some more things to do. While working on this talk, it occurred to me that I presume a lot in an art lecture. Art talks are problematic for me because the pieces on exhibit are not the only thing. The backstory, the stuff around the art is often just as important. All artists niggle something in their work. All artists, no exceptions, are entranced, fascinated, concerned by some aspect of life, visual or conceptual. I'm a visual artist, obviously, but I'm also a natural historian. Natural history has its roots in the observation of plants and animals. For years, in addition to drawing observationally, my work has taken on more concept, and that concept is my interest in how all of the other species like crayfish, oops, it's not doing it. Unbelievable. Wait a minute. Aha, okay, thank you. I'm glad you were there. Like crayfish, hold on, I'm gonna grab this. Like crayfish and starlings and groundhogs and earwigs and mockingbirds, they live alongside us, or rather how they try to live in the margins of our human-dominated landscape. I repackage my observations, my questions, and I represent them to the world in the form of art. The transformation and the representation of the world is fundamental to what artists do. So as I said, I'm a visual artist, not a scientist. I make a kind of visual work that could be called conceptual, a quick definition of conceptual, and we might call it a research, or the concept, or we might call it research meets the visual halfway. In other words, the work is about something, sometimes something other than what you're looking at. Research and learning has become an integral part of my art making. In a way, you could say that I've brought together or synthesized a habit of observation and my love for the things that I observe. So now for a little bit of a biography part of this talk. I had problems with the biography part of it, of all my talks, but I put 3 anecdotes together that I think will help with looking at the show, thinking about the work, and listening to my talk. I value art. I see it as an absolute necessity for a healthy society. These are illustrations, they're watercolor and collage, and they're from a book by called Frederick by Leo Leonini. And I think it's 1960s, middle 1960s. Early on, I loved this book. It had a seemingly frivolous, lazy mouse who gathered warmth and color and sounds and such while his fellow mice labored to stockpile food for the winter. In lieu of working, Frederick the mouse busied himself paying close attention to the world around him. He was gathering all these things that might go unnoticed, color, sound, shape, and packaging them up to represent them to his mouse family for their aesthetic sustenance during the winter. Maybe tellingly, I still see no problem at all with Frederick's lack of helpfulness. This book and these images of gathering resonate with me to this day. This reference probably doesn't make me look very good, but it's an apt description of the importance that I give art in my life. Here's a second little story. I grew up in Roanoke, not far from here. It might not seem immediately relevant, but in my head, it's clearly connected. So let me see if I can make that connection to you, for you. For my first 12 years, I lived in a brand new neighborhood, maybe 5 miles from here, just off of Peters Creek Road. From what I know of the subdivision, it was originally a huge 1,000-acre property, probably an oak savanna habitat. We lived in the very middle of it. Most of the lots were a 1/4 acre or so with a house, a sidewalk, maybe 1 tree. My father, who had something to do with the design of the subdivision, slyly saved 3 acres for our house, and he kept all the trees. Our yard had red maples, pignut hickory, actually 3 types of hickory, but I don't know what the other 2 were, scarlet oak, and a good number of tremendous mature white oaks. We had a vernal pool in the little fragment forest at the edge of the property and a seasonal stream. It was idyllic. Most of these photos up here right now are from where I live now in Rockbridge County, but they're representative of the species that I grew up with. Birds, redstarts, red-headed woodpeckers, phoebes, downy woodpeckers, brown creepers, nuthatches, and salamanders. I didn't know my salamanders when I was little, so I have no idea what they were. I could guess, but I don't know what they were. And 5-lined skinks and mammals, possum, fox, skunk, groundhog, flying squirrels, raccoons, short-tailed shrews, and snakes. Are there any snakes in here? Did I put any snakes in the other one? There's 2 snakes. Nope, that's 1 snake. Okay, and snakes. We had ringnecks, worm snakes, garter snakes, and my very favorite, which I've maybe seen a couple of times since my childhood, but I saw them every day when I was growing up, and they were rough green snakes. All of these were evident, even constantly around for the first 12 years that I lived in that house. It was zoo-like. My father put a window at toddler level in the second floor kitchen that looked out at a window-length bird feeding platform up against the glass. I could watch pileated woodpeckers 2 inches from my face eating suet during the day and flying squirrels eating the same at night. My parents had an above average interest in and a knowledge of all these other species and a way above average reverence for their existence. I grew up thinking that this concentration of all these different species of animals was normal, but in retrospect, I think our property was a sort of island refuge, the last remaining good habitat for a lot of these species. It was for sure a phenomena, a vestigial population of animals pushed from all sides and concentrated in the only habitable plot in the subdivision. I won't get maudlin about that, but my realization of all that when I was in my 30s affected me greatly. These photos, the photos before were my son's photos, and they're way better. than mine. So I've had to put them all on the same page, but these are also representative of the animals that were on our property. I'm going to hit this wrong again. Oh, I got it. Okay. One more anecdote, and I think that this is about my drawing process. I think it is. My mother was a horticulturist. She surrounded our home with flower beds, some shade, some sun, but with a huge variety of native and non-native plants. She was always in the garden. That's not an exaggeration. It was a good thing and a bad thing. And as a preschooler, I was usually with her with color markers and paper and a board my father made for me to tape the paper on. I drew naturally the flowers. I drew them and asked what they were and found that my mother could tell what the flowers were from the drawings that I had made. This was formative for me. So to lead you to the point, drawing and identification was synonymous from the beginning. Now, at some point in the last year, I got this idea that the next time I talked about my work in public, I swore that I would explain the way I observe and think about stuff with a kind of a little mini TED Talk. And so I've made one that is pretty closely related to the themes in my current and recent work. And I've tried to distill some of the more important points, as any good TED Talk would, but it's much shorter and it's not professional. Okay, it's awful. It's not awful, it's great information, but it's not. And the other thing is that I can't stand for you not to have anything to look at while I'm talking. My pet peeve is sitting on a slide for too long. So, so I've made illustrations, and illustrations is in air quotes. I'm really putting my stuff down, but this is about the slide, this part. But I drew these really, really fast. So you'd have something to look at, okay? So we're gonna jump right in. Let's just jump right in. So birds are beautiful. I think everyone agrees with this. So let's start with birds. What do birds need to survive? Let me stop here and say the obvious, a really general umbrella fact. All animals need food, water, and shelter to thrive and reproduce themselves. And now, 4 or 5 minutes into the talk, I don't know how long I've been talking, I'll say the most important thing I'll say tonight. Birds eat insects, okay? If you leave with anything, you're gonna leave with that tonight, right? Birds eat insects. At some point in their life cycle, and sometimes their whole life, the vast majority of birds in this part of Virginia need to eat insects. Insects are critical for feeding the nestlings for the next generation. Nestlings simply can't grow to adulthood without digesting loads of insects. Let me say that again, that baby birds starve without a plentiful supply of insects. So the next question is, where do they find these insects? Well, they find these insects where those insects live, or these insects live. And insects live in every kind of biome. Insects live in every kind of biome. Insects need, and this is where I have to say it again, this is a really repetitive talk. Insects need food and water and shelter to thrive and reproduce themselves. They don't just come out of nowhere. So this is where it gets a little complicated. Both birds and insects and all animals, like I said, need specific things to survive. They need plants and conditions to do this living and thriving and multiplying. Nearly every school child in America can tell you that monarch butterflies only lay their eggs and the caterpillars only grow on milkweed plants. This is a good thing. It's a great thing that children know this, and really most children know this, but it isn't an exception. An awful lot of insects have a special relationship with the plant that they feed on, a native plant. And in Virginia, the vast majority of the insects being caught and fed to nestlings are native insects. And you know what's coming next. The native insects need specific native plants to eat and grow and survive. Birds eat seeds, we all know that, but all of those birds eating seeds at your feeder are also, in the winter, are also feeding their young insects in the spring. The connections here are obvious. Healthy bird populations need healthy insect populations, and healthy insect populations need healthy and varied plant populations. That was a hard sentence. Increasing and protecting these populations gets in the way of efficient farming. It gets in the way of our aesthetic when maintaining our yards and gardens and parks. And for some, it comes right up against societal phobias of spiders, wasps, and snakes. So back to birds, and I really have no more fondness for birds than I do snakes or spiders or turtles or squirrels, whatever. If you are one of those people, and I think we all are, who enjoy birds, love looking at birds, love the sound of a dawn chorus, you also have to learn how to love those rough areas, the insects, all that messy stuff that allows birds just enough room and the ability to continue to live alongside of us. To preserve the long-term viability of birds and insects and mammals and reptiles and amphibians, we simply need to scoot over and share. I'm going to say that one more time because I rarely have the public venue to do it. For these things to thrive, we need to scoot over and share. So I wrote the above, and I'm not sure what to call it, an info talk, very, very recently, and it's still very raw, but it really does, it encapsulates a lot of the things that frustrate me right now. And it seemed dishonest not to include it. To a great extent, frustration with human relationships with other species, human greed, fuels my work. I've always had this incredibly naive idea that if I could make just the right little presentation and people really heard it, they would throw up their hands and say, oh my God, I didn't know, I don't need all this, I'll start sharing right this minute. I don't know, it's a source of great pain for me. And that's the end of that TED Talk, by the way. So obviously, this recognition, I'm going to leave it on this last photo though. So obviously, this recognition of how much room we take up as one species is kind of a touchstone for me. It's what I niggle. The juxtaposition between how much room we take up as one species and how all those other species have to contort themselves to fit around and into our spaces is and has been my content for more than a decade. And now for the traditional part of an artist talk where I talk about the actual work. This exhibit, this beautiful exhibit that these beautiful people have put on, consists of two exhibits, work from a 12-year-old Irish project and more recent work from here in Virginia. The Irish work led to the work here in Virginia. It's kind of a long, drawn-out visual research project that really never ends. For me, the final product, the display, is the result of process, a long process, and not even the most interesting part of it for me. I'm much more invested in the process, and I think the process is what I've been talking about since I started talking. I'm much more invested in the process because it's in the process where I'm living my best life, learning new things, making connections, and drawing. So this art process story starts when I went to Ireland in 2012 with my 8-year-old son in search of a visual art project. And this is my eldest son, Locke, in front of a Martello Tower, a Napoleonic tower, or a tower that they built against Napoleon on the west coast of Ireland. The majority of my work this last decade relates to a small island, Auchnish Island, off the west coast of Ireland. The image showing is a view of the island from the mainland, and the island is up here in the ocean. Galway is at the very top across that big water. And I think I did. Here's a fuzzy map of Ireland, and Galway. I can't jump that far, but can y'all see Galway? Okay, so it's right across the bay from that little red dot where Galway is. So for the 10 years, for 10 years with one summer off for COVID, I spent a portion of my summer on Auchnish Island. It's geologically a part of County Clare, but Galway County claims it. It's located at the southern edge of Galway Bay, and it's connected by a causeway to the mainland. You can see the causeway in this image, off to the right. It's a little tail off of that chunky diamond shape. From this image, you can see that it is almost entirely pasture and farmland and a few houses. I'd been working in my barn studio, and this is not my barn studio, this is Ireland. I'd been working in my barn studio here in Virginia, making work inspired from the rough areas around my property. And it occurred to me that my work would benefit from a whole new context. In essence, I went looking for a project where I could learn about another context, another biome. I'm not using that right, but another project in another context. My previous ties, both personal and professional, to Ireland made it attractive and realistic to make my own artist residency there. So that's what I did. I set up an open-ended proposal for myself, and I proposed to arrive without any preconceptions as to the work I wanted to make. Although I do want to say, as I said before, that my work had always been concerned to some extent with natural history observational drawing and life in the margins. I gave myself a year or so to winnow out the project, and from there see where it took me. Let's see. Here are a few things that I brought to the project. I knew a bit about the culture of West Ireland, having taught briefly at an art college there. I took with me a fairly broad knowledge of the natural history of North America. And this and a few other visits to Ireland in subsequent years gave me a superficial knowledge of the natural history there, the birds, the botany, ecology, and to a lesser extent, the sea life. This is an aside. I chose Auchnish Island for mysterious reasons, even for me. I really honestly didn't choose it knowing what kind of project I would do, but I think I must have, I'd been there before. There are no tourists there at all, ever. You never see a tourist bus there. Actually, one came in at some point while I was there and got stuck because there's nowhere to go and the roads are so narrow. And so I think it attracted, and I also had a good friend that lived there. So anyway, I chose it, and it was perfect for getting to know the natural history fairly fast. At first, I learned about the flora and the fauna, and I explored the landscape. I read about the history of the area, and soon the ecology of Western Ireland became a major focus for my work. Compared with the US, Ireland has relatively few birds, insects, mammals, and actually less plant life. This is a long story, but it can be partly summed up by human development over thousands of years. It's also an island, and it's also very small. I mean, it's, smaller than the US. We're extremely rich in species here. So this is on the island, and just tons of beautiful, all kinds of different forms to draw. So I drew. I really love to draw, and I have to say that. I love to draw, and everything I do is drawing. I translate everything through drawing, and in my studio life, either it's a drawing, or it's going to be a drawing, or it's a direct product of a drawing. Every project I take on begins in drawing. It's the gateway medium to my work process. Though I work in multimedia, I've found that the concentration of observational drawing, the repetition of looking and drawing and looking and drawing, allows me to fully see and understand whatever is in front of me. This is very fuzzy. Here's a piece in the current show. It's a sort of a contextual piece. It's a map of Auchnish. You'll recognize the shape of the island from a previous slide. Auchnish is 1 mile by 2 miles, surrounded by a rocky shore on one side and a sandy beach on the other. It's a shallow, it's like it looks a little bit like a shallow volcano coming out of the Galway Bay. It was severed from the mainland by the effects of the Portuguese tsunami of 1755, and a causeway was built around the time Napoleon Bonaparte was threatening Ireland. It's populated these days by 45 to 50 permanent human inhabitants, dogs, cats, lots of cows, a few donkeys, horses, hares, a fox family, seals, and a good number of birds, rooks, lots and lots of rooks. There's at least 2 rookeries on the island with huge conglomerations of rooks, jackdaws, wagtails, a few robins, a few greenfinch, a lot of goldfinch, and 2 pairs of stone chats, one on either side of the island. The island has been farmed and divided by rock walls for more than 400 years. There are very few trees left on the island. And relatively speaking, in Ireland, for that matter, there are forests, but a lot of them are Sitka forests now. But there aren't a lot of native tree forests left. And one more thing, the island is geologically connected to the Burren, and if anyone's been there, it's very picturesque, and picturesque is a gross understatement. It's a rugged limestone terrain with a really distinctive plant community. And Auchnish is a little island that is a tiny island connected to the Burren, and it looks like the Burren in miniature. So this is one of the first works that I made to orient myself. I drew it about 2/3 of the way through the project. I made it as a visual to help me with the overall project. I couldn't have made the same drawing in the beginning, and it would look entirely different if I made it today. For me, this is like a journal entry. The memories and the knowledge embedded in it are both personal and observational, and honestly, it was probably out of date on the day that I finished it. A lot of so the cows move around a lot. And I remember when I drew it, I thought that stupidly thought that the cows stayed in the same place. And, but I remember coming back the next year and realizing that a lot of those vertical shapes that are pastures, that they change them from season to season. And so the little dots would be down here anyway. I learned a whole lot from making this. And one of the other things that I learned was what family owned what, which was really interesting to me. And I'm not going to get into the gossip about the island, but that was a big deal. It gets to be a big deal if you're there over time. So it was really cool to see which families had been farming in the same place for 300 years. The house that my pencil is hovering over is my friend Una's. She doesn't live in that house anymore. At least one of the stone walls was cleaned of a hedge, so a fence could be put up, and things change. So I spent time over 2 or 3 years exploring all these drawing possibilities, getting to know the island and the people, and I'll tell you about one of the many avenues I took. Some were dead end and some led to something. I spent a summer cataloging the most abundant common species on the island. It wasn't conclusive. I drew things that came to my notice, things that attracted me. I didn't do a lot of digging conceptually. The first thing I did was collect and draw snails, hundreds and hundreds of them. They were very attractive to me before, and they still are. Here are drawings of Littorina obtusata snails, which are found all over the rocky beach on the north side of Auchnish. They're not on the south side of Auchnish. I made most of the specimen drawings on 4x4 cards so that I could transport and file them and then get them back to the US. I spent a week or so, these are the snail drawings, excuse me. These are, I think these are in the gallery. There are a lot of these in the gallery. I spent a week or so drawing seaweed and not learning as much as I should have about the varieties. Ended up drawing brown algae or rack, shown here in the foreground. There were at least 5 or 6 really common types of seaweed, and I didn't learn them. And I still feel bad about that. But these are this was the most common, and it's the brown rack. And they were endlessly fascinating to draw. I never could get the project to, I could never connect it to anything else, but here, I'll tell you about it. So I think I have, yeah. I drew 99 of these connecting studies over a week or so with walnut ink. So these are 4x4 cards that can be arranged in any configuration, and they always connect. And a friend told me that it's called a Mariorama. And here's a funny little project that went absolutely nowhere. I made a few drawings of the ubiquitous beach pebbles, the big ones. This is about this high. It's about 5 inches high, and they have these really interesting wormholes in them, and they're ubiquitous in the Burren, on the beach. And I've been told that it's several types of bivalve mollusks in there first when they're really tiny, that they're chewing into the rocks, and then they use these little holes as shelters. So this is one of the larger limestone cobblestones from the rocky side of the island. And here are some little rock drawings of the little teeny tiny ones that I found on the beach, drawn on these 4x4 cards. And these are wormholes. These are the actual holes in the rocks that I extracted and drew. And I drew far more of them than I probably should have, but they interested me a little bit. And I drew seeds and grasses, and really would go out every morning with a little pouch and pick up things and try to identify them. I had a friend who had a beautiful big natural history library, and I used his books and another friend's books to look things up. Terrible Wi-Fi there, and I don't think I ever used my phone to identify things until the very end. But these are ash seeds. I did a lot of tree seeds. There were maple trees and oak trees and ash trees and rowans, and all of them had effluvia that were fun to draw. And finally, somewhere in the first 3 years, I fell in love with an individual whitethorn tree, a Crataegus monogyna, and I started noticing them everywhere on the island, usually in hedgerows, dividing pastures and defining roads. This is really actually a very good friend of mine. Whitethorns mean a lot to Irish people, even if they call them something else like hallbush, maybush, or fairy tree. Everyone knows what they are, and everyone knows they're special. There's a lot of folklore associated with them. Their very existence has stopped major roads from being built, and at least one farming family I know has been mowing around the same whitethorn tree for generations. No one cuts down a fairy tree without a lot of thought. In fact, some of the local people could tell me where one used to be. I didn't know any of that at first. I was attracted by their ubiquity and, quite simply, their gorgeous leaves and shapes. They're central to every hedgerow on the island. They're a nexus of insect activity. The bees love the creamy pink-white blossoms. When it rains, whitethorns are surrounded by solid white puddles of fallen petals, a sight that you can't ignore. Whitethorns are always really shapely. They're not actually shapely, but they're interestingly shaped. They're really, really green, and they're implausibly covered with really sharp thorns. They drape themselves over stone walls, and then they're sometimes high up on sea cliffs, kind of clinging to the tops of the cliffs. They creep along the ground, but when they're left alone without cows or wind to shape them, they're round and dense, and sometimes they top out at about 15 feet. As I said, mostly I found them in hedgerows. So I started drawing them, and I started with the leaves, whitethorns have many shapes of leaves, which was a source of great delight to me. 3 lobes, 2 lobes, no lobes at all. I drew every variation, every age of leaf, collected color, started into blossoms and buds and nascent berries, and I collected more color, and I collected twig fragments of up to 1 inch in diameter. I ended up thinking about whitethorns the remainder of the time that I worked in Ireland, and this was about halfway through. In the same way that whitethorns are an umbrella or key species for the hedgerows and field margins, the whitethorn became the umbrella species or idea for all of the work I did on Auchnish. I keep looking up to see how they look really giant. They look like branches. Back in my studio in Virginia, I decided to make a whole tree, and I wanted to do it very quickly. I took all of the whitethorn study drawings and simplified them and had them made into rubber relief stamps. A much longer process than that sentence. These are stamps in my studio, and that's the beginning of the whitethorn tree. So the big pages over to the left of the tree are the ones that I was stamping and then coloring and then cutting out. It took a while to translate all of those stamps, but when I was done, I had about 100 custom rubber stamps, relief stamps of leaves, buds, flowers, stems, twigs, and thorns. The flower buds were stamped using, I mean, all of it was stamped using a brown black ink and then individually colored, but these are cute little flower buds. With these, I constructed a tree, but before I made the tree, I had to learn how to construct the various parts of the tree. So this is where observation comes in, and actually it's the kind of stuff I really, really, really love. I used the sketches, the color swatches, photos and films, and of course stamps, and of course also looking at whitethorns in place to make dozens of these branch studies, paying close attention to how the leaves were bunched, which leaves were found on the tips of the branch, how the bud stems attached to the branch, what colors were on the older leaves, etc. All my knowledge came from the questions I asked and the visual research I made while I was in Ireland. This, here's another 3. This tree is the tree that I made. It's about 6 feet wide and 7 feet tall. It seems small, but it took what seemed like a lifetime to make. All of the leaves were stamped and hand colored, as were the twigs and the smaller branches. It's a facsimile of a tree that means a lot to me, not the one that we saw in that photo, but it's another tree. It isn't actually on Auchnish Island. It's by a holy well, a St. Coleman's well, which is about 2 miles from the island on the mainland. It's just about this height in real life. I wanted to find a small one, but it is very old, not sure how old. The wind has stunted it. So, and this is a close-up. So as the years went on, I met people who worked in the fields of natural history, conservation, land use, etc. I read a lot. Years of drawing and observing and lots of visits to Ireland made me aware that the places where whitethorns lived, the hedgerows, they were just everything. Hedgerows, wild areas on the edges of a human-dominated landscape became the focus of my work. Learning about whitethorns dragged a whole world of knowledge with it. I began to census them, the insects, birds, plants, etc. I even doodled them. These are 2 separate ones, I think. These are, the ones on the left is the same one, and the one on the right, which looks the same, I did years before, so I've been doodling these forever. This is a little paper hedgerow, the one on the right, the left, that I made this winter, actually when Janet and I were visiting Ireland. We were listening to a tennis match, I think, and I started making these little doodles. I started to understand the important role they play in biodiversity in Ireland. They're vital to the ecosystem simply because they're biodiversity hotspots. They harbor a huge portion of the native flora and fauna, and that's so important. there. In addition, hedgerows are carbon sinks. They filter water and prevent floods. They provide shelter and food. And one of their most important functions is that of a wildlife corridor, linking habitats all across Ireland and making it possible for wildlife to travel unmolested by cars or people. Irish people are beginning to understand that hedgerows are direly important. They've always been an aesthetic delight for most people and a lot of the people that I have met and talked to in Ireland, but they're realizing how important they are for biology and for biodiversity now. Their hedgerow tours, just in the last 10 years, they've started popping up, legislation to prevent cutting during bird nesting season, classes on making jams from hedgerow fruits, hedge laying courses, and generally a national pride in hedgerows. I was delighted to see this poster last time I was in Ireland, really delighted. And I'm seeing a lot of hedge laying clubs and things like that. So back to Virginia, I started noticing, and some art, I started noticing all the little rough areas on my land and the lands around me, the hedgerows, the riparian corridors, roadside tangled areas, and I made these drawings from the informal shots that I collected on my phone. I take a lot of research photos, or they're kind of anxiety photos. So I'll take photos of landscapes and rough areas and things like that. And they aren't usually for the beauty of the photo. I don't take that good of a photo, but they're more likely to be a concern or an environmental issue I'm grappling with. I set out to draw these photographic images, mostly landscapes, and then decided to add text that described what I was thinking when I took them. So the text describes each photo, and it isn't always a straight description, but it's often a description of why I took the photo. I also have to add here that I teach comic, and comic has crept into every aspect of my art now. It's very obvious in the gallery. The serial imagery and the writing, actually, the text. So some are literal. A ghost crab hole on the North Carolina Outer Banks is just that, a ghost crab hole on the North Carolina Outer Banks. Of course, that's on the left. But some of the images hold more complex meaning. One is, or the one on the right, is this vanished hedgerow, a rich hedgerow full of mockingbirds, thrashers, and screech owls at night. It was a friend for years, and but it was cut down recently, not recently, in the last 3 years to gain a few more feet to farm. There really isn't much to the photo, but this is what I see when I look at it. I guess I could simplify this by saying I don't see just a pleasant pastoral Rockbridge County landscape. I'm inescapably reminded of the hedge that used to be, and what I can't help but notice distresses me. So obviously the things I was thinking about in Ireland started to soak into my observations at home, and I started to make parallel work. And we're going to go back to the cheery hedgerows. So I read histories of Irish land use and environmental policy, as I said, and started following hedgerow Twitter. It was such a thing until it went to hell. I found we're trying to regroup on different social media, but everybody's in a different place. So, but I found the rewilding movement, a movement to restore areas of land to its natural uncultivated state, especially with regards to restoring plants and animals. And while that was compelling to think about, so far it just doesn't seem practical in much of Ireland or really most of North or Eastern America, where it's so densely populated. But I have to say here that in Ireland now, in the last 3 or 4 years, some of the rewilding projects are reaping benefits like crazy. Especially one guy in right above Dingle who is rewilding a huge amount of land into Irish rainforest. and it's just been spectacular. So it is working, and at least a lot of the flora and fauna is coming back already. But I did stumble onto the idea of reconciliation ecology. It's a branch of ecology that kind of fit what I was thinking about, or what I've been thinking about lately. And it studies ways to encourage biodiversity in densely populated areas, basically, where humans are dominating the ecosystem. And reconciliation ecology it's a middle ground. It's a framework to make our landscapes, or human-dominated, I keep using that word, I'm sorry, human-dominated landscapes more friendly to the species which are struggling to hold on alongside of us. In reconciliation ecology, hedgerows are the original mini wildlife preserves, back to Ireland. In Western Ireland, hedgerows are where the birds nest, where the hedgehogs live, and where the insects congregate. Over years, I came to appreciate, even revere, the role of hedgerows in the Irish landscape, and consequently the role of hedgerows, verges, roadside tangles, and such here at home. And this is where I put in a slide to take a sip of water. I have it written down. This is obviously an overview of Ireland, and these are classic hedges. They excite me just to look at. They really do. And you can see how they're corridors, how they're connected. So flipping back to art in Virginia, the photos here, these two photos, are a fairly recent project, a sort of a hedge making kit. And the pieces are laser cut from maple, and they're stained with wood stain. There are 21 pieces to a box, and I made an edition of 20 boxes. And they're North American, I think I said that already, but they're North American hedgerows. So all of the trees, even though they're stylized, they're representative of a certain bush plant, herbaceous plant, or tree that's found in hedgerows in Virginia. And I think I have a bunch of shots of them because they're cute. When I first got them, I think I say this somewhere in here, I did not make them because I thought they would be cute, but they really got cute. And they were fun to work with. So this is several boxes put together, but I started making them kind of obsessively, my own little hedgerows. Let me see, I have one, sorry. Recently, I added expansion packs of hedgerow mammals and hedgerow reptiles and amphibians and hedgerow birds. And 3 sets of editions of 20 boxes. All the animals are found in Northeast American hedgerows or roadside rough areas. And so I've completely moved my attention home. These are not complete because I realized a couple of weeks in, and I screamed in the car that I forgot rabbits. Really the most obvious one I forgot. There was another one, but I'm going to try not to remember which it was, but it's bad. So the previous photos, these guys, and farther back were from a past show, and now I've added these animals for a more chaotic display. I think hoping to convey the sheer amount of animals that depend on a corridor of bushes, trees, and small herbaceous plants. Each box has a little list of species and the scientific names. I'm very fond of this project, as you can tell, and I never thought of these as playthings. I like the idea that they might be cute enough to make people wonder why they were made, or who would bother to make them, and maybe realizing that they were real species and realizing that they were from this one type of habitat. I thought that'd be cool. But as I said, arranging them became just fun. And this is a shot from the gallery. So as I said, when I came home to Virginia, I started to take note of the role of hedgerows and verges and roadside tangles. I began to think about the damage done by what in Great Britain is called ecological tidiness disorder, my favorite phrase I've learned truly in the last 12 years. I use it a lot and nobody ever knows that I'm insulting them, but it's great. It's very hard to say ecological tidiness disorder. I will never look at VDOT mowing roadsides or the clearing of fence lines in the same way again. So we have hedgerows. We don't call them hedgerows. I mean, some of us do, but they're not actually hedgerows. They're the narrow, rough areas that divide properties or front the road in front of houses before people forget to, or remember to get rid of them. These rough areas quite literally hold all the life on the edges of pastures in much the same way that they do in Ireland. And it's, we're becoming more and more developed. And so we're getting animals are depending more and more on these areas. Stuff lives in them, so much stuff, lots of stuff. There are hedgerows near my home where which I pass frequently, filled with, and this is from here. These are both within a mile of my house. But there are hedgerows near my home, which I pass frequently, filled with red cedar, blackberry, and honeysuckle. And I know the individual mockingbirds which live in each section, and mockingbirds love these areas. I know the groundhogs raising their young in a hole that are protected by the hedge, and red foxes. There was red foxes near here. Yeah, right near here, that had a den dug into the bank. So this is where this is where these animals have found, sometimes the only place they've found to live on the edge and the messy edge of our existence. I live in fear that the next time I pass, all will be mown to the ground like this one near my house, and I'll have to find a new route, which I do that, one that bypasses the dead stumps and the shiny new fence. So the last work I will leave you, which is also depressing, the last work I will leave with you is an unfinished installation here in the gallery from this year. It's titled "We Had All This," and it depicts 290 specific species that live on or very near to the Mountain Valley pipeline, which I think all of you probably are familiar with. By this point, you can probably see where this piece is coming from, or where it came from. One late evening, listening to a radio show about the pipeline, out of anger, I naively vowed to draw all the species that were not being talked about, all the unsexy species. I only got to 290. It was a ridiculous project. I don't particularly like drawing like this, and it took forever. There are 729 moths alone in the George Washington National Forest, and 466 known beetle species, and it just goes on and on. And you may notice that I very intentionally obscured the drawings. I did it out of malice. My hope at that time was, at the time that I made it, I don't feel as angry right now, but my hope at that time was that the viewer would be frustrated to some extent. Here are a few, is that true? Yeah, here are a few unobscured shots. Drawing these, researching what's there and what isn't was mind-blowing. It was really mind-blowing. It was a wonderful, wonderful project for me because I like knowing the things that I can't see. Like I like knowing that there are things in the forest that I can't see. I knew we had a lot, but I had no real conception of the diversity of springtails or weevils. I didn't even make a dent in the spiders. I believe I drew near 40 and there were way more than that. I think I have some spiders in here. So the title, "We Had All This," is also an admonition. My work is rarely angry, and this hardly counts as angry, but I'm working on it. There are so many crises right now out beyond the walls of this museum, and I can hardly think of anything else. The small problems in our environment, like the loss of hedgerows, seem really insubstantial, hardly worth the effort. And the large problems are beyond overwhelming. All art seems beside the point. In the past, my work has existed pleasantly alongside a really lovely life, super lovely life. The last few years, I've had to ask more of my work. I want the viewer to have a comprehension of something, no matter how little or seemingly inconsequential. For me, the slow accumulation of bits and pieces of knowledge of my context has made me understand all over again how everything is dependent on everything else, and that paying close attention to one species, very close attention, drags in the rest of the world, and that can only be good. Thank you for listening.